Hey everybody, it's Dave here, Darren over there. We're your two old bloggers. We're here today to talk about the Minnesota Vikings. Sorry for the 24-hour delay, but allergies have kicked my butt the last few days, and yesterday I was absolutely miserable trying to figure out if it's dust or grass pollens that is absolutely doing it. I still have itchy eyes, but we will continue and the show will go on. Today, we'll have all three themes today going. First off, we're going to talk about the need to fill the cornerback cupboard because it is a little bare. We only have 5 corners assigned to this team. We need at least 10. So, obviously, at least one more, if not 2 more, will probably be taken in the draft. Secondly, we're going to get into said draft. The Vikings had their preseason draft presser where Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell sat down with local journalists to answer questions and say a whole lot of nothing. But can you read between the lines? We will attempt to do that today. And finally, in the third theme, we have viewer questions. You asked, we'll answer, and we get into that next. Vikings First and SKOL presents This Week in Vikings Land with Darren and Dave, your two old bloggers. Hey again, it's Dave here, Darren over there, and as traditional, how are things in the great white north there, Darren?
They are good, Dave. But for me, it's going to work and dreaming about the draft these days. That's about all I do. So I'm looking forward to today to talk a bit about the draft, even though it's slow news-wise, Vikings-wise here, unless you're talking about the draft. And so that's really what we've been focusing on the past couple of weeks and next week and the week after as well, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We're what? 11 days, something like that away from the draft? A week from Thursday, folks. A week from Thursday. So we're getting closer and closer. And next week's show on Two Old Bloggers, Darren and I will be finishing up last-minute stuff, talking about the draft, going into it. And then the show following, we'll be wrapping up who the Vikings selected. Will we be happy or will we be grumbling?
Puzzled.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll find out. All right. Now it's time to go switch scenes and start the show. We named this one Adofo-Mensah and O'Connell discuss the 2023 draft, Vikings draft plans, and more. With that, let's start theme 1. And we have looking for cornerbacks.
Nice graphic. I think it sums things up pretty well too right now, at least for me. And I want to thank everybody who's listening in. Drew, Proto, there'll be more coming in.
Bob.
I think I've seen Davey Chains.
Davey's in there.
Like he always
MWO's here, of course.
Yeah. Well, we talked, it seems like every week I'm talking about corners. So if you might tell, I'm a bit concerned about that position right now.
Just a bit.
And this week Chris Boyd, it had got announced this was one of the little bit of Viking tidbit news that came up was that Chris Boyd had signed with the Arizona Cardinals. We didn't in the 2 or 3 years we've been doing this show, Dave. It's been very rare we've talked about Chris Boyd.
Right.
There's a reason.
It was in relationship to special teams.
Yeah.
We had not.
And that's why he was a backup to the backup, and an important special teams guy, but not a guy that got to see the field a lot. as a cornerback. There was a reason why for that, because he's not really a very good one, according as far as the coaches, as far as two coaching regimes think. But anyway, he is gone, and I felt that was a bit significant because right now that means that he is the fifth guy who was part of the cornerback unit last year who is currently either not going to be back in 2023 or looks like he isn't going to be back. So there's him, Patrick Peterson. Cam Dancer was released, signed with Washington. Chandon Sullivan has not been re-signed, and I don't think he will be re-signed by us. Patrick Peterson, again, he'd gone with the Steelers. Duke Shelley signed with Las Vegas, and now Boyd is gone, so as well. And that leaves us with five, like you said. Byron Murphy, who we signed in free agency, Caleb Evans, Andrew Booth Jr., and then the two practice squad guys, Tay Gowan and Kalen Barnes. And as you said before, Dave, you said early in the show, you really need a minimum of 10 to get through the season. We only have 5, which means Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has a lot of work still to do to shore up this cornerback unit. And
well, you need 10 to go into camp. It usually goes down to about 6, possibly 7 on a 53-man roster. But you need at least that many. You have to have them. It's just like training camp. If you have your primary quarterback and your secondary quarterback, that's not enough. They'll throw way too many footballs if that's the case. You need a third and sometimes even a fourth. Most teams go with a fourth, just a camp arm to throw footballs. It's the same way with corners. You need a minimum of 10 so that they can spin up to speed and practice, the full ones on ones, twos on twos, twos on threes, shuffling guys in. If somebody gets a boo-boo or sprains an ankle, you need a replacement. All that sort of stuff has to be there. And we only have 5.
Yes, and of the 5, Byron Murphy is really, if you look at the top 3 corners on the Vikings depth chart right now, again, Tay Gowan, Kalen Barnes are practice squad guys at best, but you got Byron Murphy, Andrew Booth Jr., and a Caleb Evans. And of those 3, your top right now, those would be your starting guys. They'd be the guys that would be your starters. Who's playing nickel in that? We don't know. But probably Murphy for a bit of it anyway.
Murphy most likely will move into nickel during nickel downs where they, when they call nickel. And that means Evans and Booth, whichever one isn't on the field at the time, will come in on the field on the opposite, on whatever side they move in from, that Murphy moves in from. But is that optimum? That to me, that's the question. Could it be? Yeah, I hope it is. But is it?
Well, that's the thing, Dave. Like, for me, of those top 3 guys, Murphy is really the only one for me that I'm comfortable right now with him playing a lot of snaps. Booth Jr., extremely talented, one of the best corners coming out of last year's draft. But I have huge question marks about him, particularly about whether he can stay healthy or not, because he's never been able to do it at college and last year in the pro. And Caleb Evans is another huge question mark to me as a guy that you could depend on playing a lot. So, let's face it, the 5 guys that the Vikings have right now, it's just not good enough. And of those guys, those 5 that you got, let's remember, Brian Flores is the new defensive coordinator. He has a reputation for playing a lot of press, man-to-man coverage. Well, if you look at the scouting reports from Caleb Evans when he came out of college, 6'2", very long, but considered more of a fit as a zone corner and not really a fit as strong as a man-to-man corner. Well, that worked fine when Ed Donatel was your defensive coordinator because you're running a lot of zone all the time. Mm-hmm. But that's not what it looks like what we're going to do this year. So for me, even more concerns because one of the top 3 guys on our depth chart right now might not even be a good fit for the defense that we are running.
Well, and we hope if he isn't a good fit, we hope he's young enough to adapt and become one.
That is the thing. And getting the good coaching, which can, again, play to your strengths, what we've talked about last year. And again, he's long. He had some moments of promise last year, but really not enough for me to be like unconcerned about him playing a lot next year. So, hey, the 5 that we got, even in the top three, I've got concerns about some of that. And, basically, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the five we've got is not good enough. We have to add corners. We have to add cornerback talent. Now they have to be able to contribute in now and in 2023. And you're not going to get to do that through getting guys in the free agency market, although I'm sure we will pick up a veteran or two after the draft. But as of right now, there's going to have to be some guys, corners, that we're going to have to draft. And like you said, I expect the Vikings to take at least two of them, even if we only have 5 draft picks. Trying to hone in on some of the targets. I think in the first round, if the Vikings stay at 23, which is one of the options, they're not going to get Christian Gonzalez. They're not going to get probably Joey Porter Jr. and Devin Witherspoon. Those 3 guys likely will be gone by the time we get to 2023 if we pick there, which is okay because so that means you're going to get in on the second tier of guys, likely, which is guys like Cam Smith, Deonte Banks, other guys like Drew's boy, DJ Turner from Michigan. There's a host of others like that. But at Banks and Smith, I think definitely likely will be there at 23. And Banks has been the guy mock drafts. Now, everybody's got an opinion, but Banks has been the guy I've seen slotted in as the guy we pick at 23 in the most in mock drafts. What that means, I don't know, but both him and Smith are 6 feet and over, and they both play man-to-man very well. They've got a lot of experience at it, so they kind of fit what the Vikings plan to do. The question is, of course, is when you look at Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, he's only had 1 draft with us. It's a little early to tell what he's really looking for with a what up, Anthony? It's really hard to tell. We don't have a whole lot of data on what are his types, what are his trends as far as drafting goes. But if you look at last year when he drafted Booth and Caleb Evans, Caleb Evans 6'2", Booth is 6 feet. So both of those guys are 6 feet and over. Mm-hmm. I looked at the front offices that he was part of with the Browns and the 49ers from 2003 up until 2021. And of the 10 corners that were drafted by Kwesi Adofo in the front offices that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was a part of, 7 of those 10 were 6 feet or over. Now, he wasn't making the decisions on draft day in those cases with the Browns or the 49ers, but he was part of those front offices. He was providing input. He was providing data for those front offices, for the GMs like Andrew Berry, like John Lynch. And if those guys were liking bigger corners, I'm sure that has rubbed off on Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. And so that's something to look for as far as what are the Vikings looking for, other than they're looking for press man-to-man guys, yes, but they're probably not looking for press man-to-man guys who are sub 6 footers, or the likelihood of that is greater. So that's something you got to take into consideration with the guys that they might target in the first day of the draft and beyond. And I think day one, if you stay at 23, we talked about Deonte Banks, Cam Smith, DJ Turner, those types of guys. If you drop down, though, if the Vikings trade down a little bit later in the first round or trade out of the first round entirely and get an early pick in the second round, well, you're not going to your Banks and Smith, maybe even DJ Turner might not be there either when the Vikings pick. But so who might be some day 2, even day 3 targets for them? I think day 2 guy, the guy you've got right there, Emmanuel Forbes. Now, not sure if he'd make it to, like, he might get picked in the first round too, Dave, or early in the second. So depending on where the Vikings pick, they might not have a shot at him. But what we do know about Forbes is that the Vikings have already had a top 30 visit with him. They brought him into Egan specifically. They have a huge need at corner, and Forbes is a guy who plays a lot of man-to-man. He's played a lot of press. That's one thing he does well. A lot of concerns. He's tall. He's lanky. He's 6'1". He's fast. He ran a 4.35 at the combine, I believe.
Which is sweet.
It's just sweet. Now, the question, of course, is his size. He only weighed in at 166 pounds, which is shockingly thin for a guy who plays at the SEC or any college level. So he's going to have durability concerns.
It will have flashbacks of Tiny Dantzler.
Yeah, for sure. But size aside, I mean, his ball skills are exquisite. They're almost unparalleled He had 14 interceptions in 3 years, 6 pick sixes, which is a record.
Mhm.
And he did it all playing against the big boys in the SEC. So the Vikings, the talent is there. The Vikings have brought him in for a visit. They've got some genuine interest in Forbes. He makes a lot of sense to the Vikings, I think, what they're going to do defensively. And he could be, if the Vikings have an early second round pick because they traded down, or a little bit later in the first round, they traded out of 23 to say 29 or 28 or 29 or 30 or 31, and Forbes is there, he'd be tough to pass up considering, what they have currently at the cornerback position.
See ears behind me?
Oh, Merlin. But the Vikings don't have a lot of picks currently right now. But the early day one or potentially day two pick cornerback, I really see that. These are Forbes' guy. I think you got to keep an eye on. But the Vikings have been visiting with a ton of day three guys with top 30 visits or virtual visits and that sort of thing, and some guys to keep an eye on there. Mekhi Blackman from USC. And a lot of corners are going to get picked. They got picked in the past 3 drafts. There was, in 2022, 36 corners got drafted. In 2021, 37 corners got drafted. In 2020, 27 corners got drafted. So all teams are looking for a lot of corners. And this draft class I think it looks pretty deep, and there's lots of tall press guys who do a lot well in the press, man-to-man, at the corner side of things. And again, a lot of visits for the Vikings in the top 30. Mekhi Blackman. And some of these guys will be, they could be picked anywhere from 4th round, 5th round, 6th, 7th round, even undrafted rookie free agents. Jarek Bernard-Converse here from LSU. The Vikings have had a top 30 visit with him. Sterling Thomas V from the University of Alabama, Birmingham. They've had a visit with him. A couple other guys that, and they haven't had it hasn't been officially a top 30 visit, but Terrell Smith from the Golden Gophers, they've had a visit with him. He's not considered a top 30 visit because he's a local guy, but they have had him into Egan. Some other guys, even lesser known, DJ Avi from Miami, Isaiah Bolden from Jackson State, who played under Deion Sanders. Now he's more of a kick return guy, I think, than a cornerback prospect. But again, both 6'1", pretty fast. And the Vikings have also had a private visit with Brian Branch from Alabama, who's not a day 3 guy, but he's a day 1 guy. But the Vikings have, he's potentially a slot position. But getting away from Branch, another guy they've had a virtual visit with, not personal visit with, is Keitrell Clark from Louisville. So a lot of those guys, like I said, Ivy, Clark, Blackman, maybe not so much Smith, but Smith too, but they are guys that are going to be picked somewhere in the 4th round, 5th round, beyond, might not get picked at all. And something that's also need to be pointed out is that Blackman, Bernard-Converse, Sterling Thomas V, Keitrell Clark, Terrell Smith, all of those guys played either in the Reese Senior Bowl or the East-West Shrine game. And what's noteworthy about that is that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah last year, 8 of his 10 draft picks, those 8 of those draft picks, he played in one of those games. We got a lot of draft picks from those 2 games. Those corners that are late or day 3 picks, a lot of them have played in those games. Just something to keep in mind. I wouldn't be surprised if 1 or 2 of those guys either gets drafted, or if they don't get drafted, we sign them as an undrafted rookie free agent to build up, to get to that 10 guys that we need for training camp and for off season. Doesn't mean all of them are going to have significant roles, but a guy like Blackman, very experienced corner, strong man-to-man skills. He was a big flag magnet at the FBS at the college level last year, and that'll have to be taken out of him. But he can play in a lot of different coverages. Again, he's got a lot of experience, and he's got good man cover skills. Those are things that are always needed. Bernard Converse, big 6'1". He ran sub 4.40 in his pro day, so he's really fast. He's got good measurables. didn't really have a great college career, but he's a
Mateo
guy.
likes him.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Mateo must be an LSU guy, but he's a guy that we were talking about this yesterday, Dave. Even if he doesn't get drafted, he's got some traits that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is probably going to be looking at. We need to fill up the cornerback room. We can bring in guys that have traits that might not be high draft picks, but we get them in with our coaches, work on the things that they do well, coach them up. We build up the depth. We they can run. They're big. Those are things that we like. You get that quantity. You build up that depth, and you could have you've got something to work with. They're not all going to be like studs and contributors to in year one, but they're guys that you can work with and you can develop, and you need those types of players too. And I think that you're going to see so those are some names that I don't think that we should say necessarily, and they're going to really make you turn heads, but they might be Vikings for the reasons we've talked about, and just somebody to some guys to keep an eye on, because we've had visits with them, so there is interest. I always kind of wonder, Dave, I wish I was like a fly on the wall at the Vikings just to kind of see, like, what are they trying to achieve when they visit with these guys, like a DJ Ivy for a top 30 visit? How serious are they about that? Because you don't have much time as a scout, as a coach, as a GM to, just take all of your day and spend it with a young guy. There must be an objective. You must be somewhat serious about finding out what this player is all about. How does he fit in with your program? How does he fit in with your defense or your team?
Kwesi had an interview with the Vikings Entertainment Network after the presser, and he was asked that. And one of the questions he usually asks players is, what's your favorite piece of music and why does it speak to you? How does it speak to you? And he goes, I expect a different answer from everybody because everybody's different. And I do not expect them to answer what my favorite piece of music is, but he goes, they want to key in on something. And he was saying, I don't remember the player, but it was a player from last year. And the player said it was such and such music, and the song was about family, and he started tearing up because family meant a lot to him. And Kwesi was telling a story of how, well, that's the type of person we're looking for, right? And I was thinking, well, what's my favorite? I don't have a specific favorite song. I have a specific type of music that gets me going, and what it would mean to me. And it's good for everybody. Ask yourself, what do you have a favorite song? What does it mean to you? Do you have a favorite genre of song or time period of songs that, get you pumped up or get you this or get you that? What motivates you? And it's questions like that have nothing to do with football.
Mm-hmm.
But he's looking for that fit. Will this guy be good with the rest of the team? Right? And can he answer something like that? And it's interesting that they're looking at that. They're also looking to answer questions they may have open, not only about personality, but medical, right? The medical guys will get to go over them and say, hey, does that shoulder, you heard it 3 years ago? Is there any restriction in movement? And they check it out or whatever. There's certain things like that they do during those meetings, but it's basically a get together. And under the previous regime, they also brought in guys that they would know would cause conflict to see how the other ones reacted. They wouldn't draft those guys, but they bring them in knowing that this would cause a problem, and they wanted to see the other guys react. So it's a mind game, sort of. They're playing, but they want to get inside these guys' heads. I think is the most part of it, and then check medicals is probably the other. They probably already have all their, he can do a 40 and 4 flat. Or 5 flat, he can jump this high, he can do this, he can bench press it. They probably already have all those numbers. So they're looking at different things that might move him above on their charts versus somebody else. And it may be a reasoning skill or a sight and how do you react skill that they try to determine. That's the reason for those, that 30 visit that they do, and then all the local teams. And we're going to find out. Now, luckily, since we're talking about corners, this class, the 2023 draft, is deep on corners, right? It's not deep in nose tackles, and we'll get into that later. It's not deep in interior linebackers. There's certain spots. It's, it just doesn't have the quality and talent there. There's nobody there. Corners, luckily, is one of them. And luckily, it's a need for us so we can fill it. If we had a full room of 10 already and we're golden, we don't need a corner, right? Well, that would be a good thing in a way. But since it is one of our needs, and it's a big one, I am happy that we have a deep class, and that whatever they do in the draft and then post-draft, and you're right, they may not only will they probably draft one or two, they will probably go out and sign a whole bunch of UDFAs, and they may go get some veterans that are still out there as well.
And just when we talked about top 30 visits, Dave, I think important to that's something that you look at. Okay, let's really pay attention to that guy, because the Vikings must be interested in him if they've seen them at the combine or their pro days, but they also brought him into Minnesota to look at. But last year, I looked at an article that had 20 top 30 visit guys that the Vikings had top 30 visits of 20. There was still some that were missing, but of that 20, the only guy that the Vikings ended up drafting or had an opportunity to draft was Sase Otunmoeo from the University of Minnesota on the defensive line. They also brought in Kalen Barnes. We didn't draft him, but we ended up signing him later in the year. But so even though we bring in all these guys, it doesn't mean that we're going to draft or pick up 4 or 5 or 6 of them, but I bet you 1 or 2 of those guys will end up being drafted or signed as an undrafted rookie free agent. And so we just thought I'd bring some of those guys up. A lot of them aren't household names. A guy like Starling Thomas the fifth and Catrell Clark specifically, they're a little bit shorter than what they're below the 6 foot limit, if that's
desired.
That's a desired thing.
I think it was that Mateo or somebody talks about size doesn't matter, but it does to the NFL players. Somebody said that in the comments, and yes, it does matter. And we'll find out. And the draft class as a whole, there's a bunch of really small people, which is odd to a lot of folks. Drew asked a good question I want to hit real quick. He says, when choosing a cornerback, does KOC and Kwesi do they consider a pure outside coverage dude or a slot guy or both? I would, Drew, if it was me, I would be looking for all of the above. Can he play outside? Is he a slot? Can he play inside? You mark those boxes off. If he can play both, that's even better. That raises that value, as I think the NFL is sort of transitioning to positionless football, is what they're calling it, where you have a whole bunch of tweeners that can do a lot of things well. And if you can find those guys that can do a lot of things well, you want them on your roster because they can do a lot of things well, right? And especially if they're in backup roles, that works great. So if, God forbid, Murphy gets hurt and he goes out, we have somebody that knows how to play in the nickel spot. It's you want that. And I think the more versatile you are, the higher chance you have of getting selected and getting hired. It's a job interview. It's like no other. If you're going to go to work for some company, the more stuff you can do, the more likely they are to take you and hire you for it.
And Flores has talked about liking in his introductory press conference about how he likes players that can play multiple roles. So I'm sure he's looking for a corner who could be on the outside, but just slot him inside. Now the Clark and Starling Thomas the fifth, I was mentioning those because they're expected, because they're shorter, they're expected that at the pro level, they're going to be moved into a slot role. And right now, really Byron Murphy is the only guy that really, it sounds like, is suited to play the slot. So these are two guys that you could bring in. They're not going to have to play right away, but they're young, they're fast, they have slot potential, and you can develop them into a slot guy in 2 or 3 years down the road when maybe Byron Murphy isn't here anymore, or he's just playing on the outside.
Right. And that's what you want. So that, hopefully this alleviates your corner worries for now as we move on to the next.
We'll see. We'll see who they get in 2 weeks' time.
True. Until we move on to the next theme. Theme 2. They speak.
They did. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell, they, as you mentioned, it was Thursday, they had their press conference to talk about the draft. Another opportunity for Viking fans like yourself and I and everybody who's on the show to hear from the head coach and the general manager's mouths, talk about draft stuff and kind of get some idea of where we're going in the draft, who we're targeting, what positions are we targeting, what positions do we think we're okay in. And so this is always a good opportunity to kind of read the tea leaves and see what these guys are saying and see if we can get any indication of what the draft might look like in 2 weeks. And Dave, I feel after a year of listening to these press conferences from both guys is that that they have done a great job in giving you absolutely nothing to go on.
Well, that's where us being old bloggers that have done this for over 2 decades apiece learn to read between the lines just a little bit to gather those indicators.
That is true, but they get up there and they don't say very much at all, anything at all. You don't get much detail. It's all about process. There's nothing about like X and O's. It's process, and this guy's looking great, and everything's fantastic. And that's how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell run the show. Now, I don't know how many hockey fans we got in this that are listening right now. I know Drew Bunting is one of those, but I'm a Philadelphia Flyers fan, which hasn't been a great thing the past couple of years. But our head coach this past year is John Tortorella. I think a lot of hockey fans, especially American hockey fans, know who John Tortorella is. Well, John Tortorella is like the anti-Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell. When he talks at a press conference, he tells you what he's feeling at that exact moment. He'll tell you if the teams played terrible, and the Flyers played terrible a lot of times this year. He'll tell you they played terrible, and he'll tell you why they played terrible. He does the same thing with individual players. He'll call out individual players and say they're terrible, they suck, or they suck that game. The players don't like it all the time, but he gives you. And if the team isn't played terrible, he'll break down what it is that he feels they need to get better at, what their needs are. So there are a lot of like Tortorella is a guy that as a fan I appreciate because he gives me an idea that about what's wrong with the Flyers that matches up with maybe what I'm seeing. Well, again, you ain't getting that from Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell. They are not telling you anything like that. And I understand that it's different players these days, and the draft, you don't want to be tipping your hand on what you're doing. So so I understand why they do this, but it is frustrating for me as a fan when I'm waiting for these pressers and trying to get some idea of what the Vikings are, where they're headed, who they like, who they don't like. And you just kind of get what you get from, which is a lot of airy-fairy, 100,000 foot level talk. Fluff. But like you said, still were some things that if you read between the lines, there's still some things that they said Thursday that were of interest. And here's a couple of mine. Maybe some of the folks listening have a couple of theirs as well. I think the first thing that kind of stood out was, of course, they both got asked about the quarterback position, the succession plan with Kirk Cousins. What was the succession plan? And what both of them said, and was that, hey, ideally, we'd like to have bring in a young guy and have him in the building for a year before we have to really play him. Have him in the building for a year, learning under a veteran like Kirk Cousins, and then the next year, maybe he's ready to challenge for a quarterback, the number one quarterback position. That's interesting to me, Dave, and I don't know what you thought of that, but to me, that we've heard a bit of talk about how the Vikings are going to trade up and be aggressive. They're going to trade up to number 3 or trade up to get a quarterback.
Right.
Well, if Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell say that they ideally would like to get a quarterback and have him sit for a year, then that makes the possibility of them trading up to get a quarterback if they like him even this year. I can maybe that's something that's not out of the realm of possibility. Like it's not as far fetched as I think it is. So if they like Will Levis, if they like Anthony Richardson, maybe they're going to be really aggressive, even if it costs them a lot of draft capital. If they think he's the guy, maybe they are. And a guy like, particularly Anthony Richardson, he's a guy that is not going to, shouldn't really start this year.
Right.
He's
He
going to
should
need.
sit, even though he's considered probably the third, you know, he's in the second, what I would classify as the second tier of quarterbacks. First one, you have Stroud and
Bryce Young.
Bryce Young, right? And then comes Richardson. You may throw Levis into that. And then you get down to the next tier where you got Hooker and you drop
Yes.
on down. It's whether they do that. There's certain things they said that you didn't key on in the deal that they are looking for. One, Kwesi talked about impact players.
Yes.
But when it comes to a quarterback, and you did mark this down, they both want to agree and they both want to make sure that it is the right one that can make an impact. So that they believe in. Now, are they willing to go up and do that? We don't know. They've got 5 picks. It's going to cost. Now, will they go up and get Richardson? Drew's favorite answer, it depends how the board falls. At what point, if some of these guys start falling, do they go? If TJ Shroud falls to 3, do you jump up?
Yeah.
It's a good question. We won't know until, a week from Thursday.
We won't. But again, I think that just them, they laid the seeds there. It gave us a little bit of a window into their thinking, in that if they feel that they've got the guy, even if they've got a veteran, they know what Kirk Cousins can do. They know how he can perform. They know what kind of player he is. They know what he can do and what he can do for the team. But he's likely might not be here next year. In which case, if you feel you got the guy like Richardson, they're okay with having a draft that's Richardson and maybe nobody else. You know what I'm saying? And that he would sit, and that guy Richardson would not actually play in 2023.
And that would be shocking, but it would be something. Definitely give us something to talk about.
It would.
I just don't know. It's the one thing about Kwesi talking about impact players. Finding an impact player is more important than trading down and getting 2 guys where their total up is less impact than the one. I keyed off on that.
Yes.
Quarterback obviously falls into that category for most, for a lot of that, because quarterback impacts the game more than any other position. I don't know. Those are comments that raise my eyebrows during the presser. Whether they do it or not, we don't know. Nobody knows. We won't know till Thursday night. But it's an interesting deal. Now, was that done in the previous administration?
No, that, like you already talked about it, Dave. But another thing that kind of caught my eye was they mentioned just quarterback, but about how, again, there had to be alignment. Like if Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is going to pick somebody, he's going to make sure that it works with the system that Kevin O'Connell is running, particularly at quarterback, but that goes for the defense as well, I think, and special teams. And so they're going to make sure that they agree that, these are the traits that I see in him that I think are worthwhile, are the traits that Kevin O'Connell sees in him and thinks are worthwhile. we've got that. And also, when we get him, does he work with the offensive system that or defensive system that we're working at? Well, there's got to be alignment there, and they're going to make sure they're aligned if they pick the player. Well, that was something that really in the latter part of the Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman regime, we did not think was happening, where Spielman seemed to be picking players that Mike Zimmer did not want and did not care for. And that's a problem for any football team, because if the coaching staff doesn't believe in the players that you have drafted, well, how well are they going to coach them up? How much opportunity are they going to give them early on? That I think that is a real problem, and that disconnect, that lack of an alignment on the draft strategy and who we're picking, is something that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell right now, they're not letting that happen. And I think that's going to lead, I hope it leads to better draft results, both now and forever, how long those two guys are with the Vikings. I think
welcome for joining us, Niner. We're talking about pre-draft processes and
not talking much about the 49ers.
No,
just a warning.
Yes, we haven't talked about any trade of Kirk Cousins for Trey Lance. You don't need to worry. That has not come across today's show.
It has not. I thought it was a couple other things interesting from the presser that it may or may not have any impact on the draft. But Kwesi Adofo-Mensah got asked about the lack of draft picks that the Vikings have right now, and what I thought was interesting was he quickly just started talking about, hey, I'd like to have more draft picks, but hey, how about that 2022 draft class? We picked 10 players. So he was shifting the focus already onto the 2022 draft class, which didn't do a whole lot last year. We all know that. But what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was saying was basically, hey, we've got a lot of guys that I picked last year that are going to play prominent roles with our team this year. And that's really going to make up for the fact that maybe we aren't going to end up with a lot of picks this year, because the guys that I picked in 2022 are going to start coming in and kicking ass. So I thought that was an interesting way of addressing it, and also pumping up those guys from the draft class and kind of putting them on notice that, hey, boys, you got to make me look good and start producing out there. Because we might not have likely going to have 10 guys coming in for the 2023 draft class to supplement you guys if you don't pan out. So I thought that was interesting. The impact stuff, like you said, I'm all in right now and very in favor of us trading down. But again, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, maybe it's kind of to lay some indecision from other teams about what he might, like him being maybe too horny to trade down. But he basically said, and it makes a lot of sense, like, sure, trading down is, to get more picks. I'd like to have more picks, but really what the main thing is, like, do the most with the picks that you have, and that he's not going to force a trade down if he feels he can get an impact guy at 23, or maybe if he feels he can get an impact guy by moving up to 18 or 15 or whatever, he's going to do that, because it's worth more to get an impact guy like a Micah Parsons or a Justin Jefferson. Way more important to do that than to get 3 or 4 mediocre guys in the third, fourth rounds later who won't really move the needle on the Vikings being a great team.
Right, exactly. And that's, if he's going with that philosophy, I'm cool with it. But we have to see it, because I think, who was it who said he was lying because he traded down last year when he could have had an impact player, and he traded out of the spot, and we could have had, Hamilton out of Notre Dame, the safety, and he traded down and got seen.
And I think, last year's trade down was I'm getting a bit off topic, but last year's trade down, at least the way things turned out, seems a bit odd, because it's not so much the trade down, but like you said, they traded down to get a safety, which we didn't think was a huge need. But then to get Lewis Seen, that's fine. But the way if they were trading him down and then putting him in the Ed Donatel defense, which is basically have a safety play 15 yards off the line of scrimmage and cover the deep ball. Well, why would you even draft a safety in the first round if that's all they're going to do?
Yeah. Thomas makes a good point. Moving back keeps contracts lower. Yes, it does.
That is another thing.
Money is a worry, and I would argue that it probably isn't. Not with our owners. Yeah, I may have to play with some cap space here and there, but I would hate for that to be an issue. Um,
I don't think it is with the Wolves. It's just right now, like you said, with the salary cap, you do have to think about how you're not going to be able to sign a lot of veterans to fill those spots. You need to, but you need to get undrafted rookie free agents or draft picks who are making less than $1 million a year. If you're only going to have like 10 million in cap space by the time May or June rolls
yeah,
around.
well, we'll get into there's cap space issue, which may lead to.
Well, yes. The only other thing, it's kind of draft related because, but not. But the other thing that, of course, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah got asked about the future of Dalvin Cook and Zadarius Smith. And the interesting thing there was that basically Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said nothing about either guy other than, they're under contract. I have a dialogue with, yeah, I have a dialogue with both guys, but no commitment of them playing with the team in 2023. And that just makes me believe even more than I already did that neither of them are going to be playing with us in 2023, because otherwise he'd be pumping their tires a bit and talking a bit about how they might fit with the team. We're still waiting for them to get traded and add all those boatload of draft picks that we'd like. But so far, nothing's happened with them. But eventually, both of those guys are not going to be Vikings. If it might be a week or two from now, or it might be a month or two from now. But I think
Kwesi said when he was specifically asked, "Hey, you guys re-signed Madison. Can Cook and Madison, coexist?" And he hemmed and hawed and said, "Yeah, I can see there's a place." And it's like they just did for the last 4 years. What are you talking about? You can see.
Yes.
Thomas, please do not attack other viewers. Obviously, they wanted seen, or they wouldn't have made that move. But let's be civil to everybody. Everybody's a fan, and we all enjoy cheering on the Vikings. And whether we like their choices or not, that's up to you. But we don't need to attack each other in the process. So it's going to be interesting to see if we come out with anything from the draft that we can say, yes, we tied this to this little bit of a comment in the pre-draft presser. I believe with what Kwesi said, and I'm taking him for, what he said, not the actions he did last year, because I think he was under constraints last year with what the Wolves wanted. But taking him for what he says, I'm getting that they're looking for, quote, impact players. Now, they said there's depth all up and down the board. What depth and impact is two different things. An impact player is one that changes expected points added, if you want to use a stat nerd term.
Yeah.
It raises that versus keeping it the same or lowering it. And most players keep it the same or lower it. Take my boy Ed Ingram from last year. Ed Ingram, yes, he was a starter all year. Yes, we saw flashes of things that may come to pass, and he's going to turn out great. But last year's performance, he was barely below mediocre, but he was good enough to keep the starting position, and they believed in him. But he didn't change the expected points added on your offense or on the team as a whole. There are certain positions that can do that and certain quality of players that can do that. And this is where I think if they get that player, that one player makes a bigger difference than getting two players, say, of Ed Ingram's stature. He started. We showed signs. There's stuff. He's good. Heck, Booth, Scene, even though they ended up with injuries, there was no moving that expected points average. So if we can find that one player, and I'll settle for one, just one. I'm not asking for a whole lot. Just give me one. Jefferson was one when we drafted him. But if you look at all Spielman's drafts, yes, he has some. Adrian Peterson, right? He comes in, does things. You might argue Kendricks for a little bit. but it's different things, different time periods. How often did he get that one that changed the EPA from level average to this guy adds to our wins, adds to the points scored or points against? This guy stands out. He makes an impact. And under Spielman, they weren't that often. It was only once every few years, if that. And it was lucky. I want, if Kwesi can do that every year, and he didn't last year, right?
At least not at this point.
Due to injuries, I mean, we take Scene, he doesn't even earn the starting job. There was rumors he wasn't prepared when he came into camp. There's all sorts of stuff like that. Booth didn't start. You know, all those things didn't come into play. He didn't find that one last year. Well, last year I'm giving him a gimme because I think it was hamstrung by the Wills. This year is when I start, racking up the wins and losses on Kwesi's scorecard. Does he find that one impact player? If he does, I'm happy. Because we're going to fill out the rest of the roster anyways. They're going to have 90 guys going into camp. Would you have, do you want guys? We want quality depth, but I'd rather have the guys that can change the game and win us more than just a whole bunch of good or a whole bunch of mediocre. We've dealt with a whole bunch of mediocre for the last how many decades, where we finished 500, around 500. But next year, around 500, next year, right? I am so tired of, but next year, right? Let's find the guys that make the difference, that take us to that next step, to take us to the NFC Championship, that take us to the Super Bowl. All right? They can haul along those lesser guys with them, because no team is full of impact players. They're full of 1, 2, maybe 3, and those guys drag everybody else around. The more, competent players you have with them, the better chance you have to win. But they've got to bring that up. And obviously the most important position in football is quarterback. If they can find a quarterback that will make them, it'll make their legacy. And that's the most important thing for the Vikings. We've been waiting on it forever. Since the team was founded. Closest we got was with Fran Tarkington. They've got to target that sometime. And if you believe Kirk Cousins is the guy, I got a bridge to sell you down here in Texas.
Well, there you have it.
Well, Drew's talking. GM can't find one game changer in every draft. He's a worthless GM. Yep. Drew, how many GMs can't? And I'd tell you it's the majority of them.
And like I said, we hoping that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is that guy who can pick one impact guy every draft. Like I said, you're generally going to you always have one pick in the top 32 in the draft. You should be able to find a good guy amongst in that top 32. If you look at the returns from the 2022 draft, only 1 year, but not particularly promising. But like Drew said, he's expecting Scene to really rock in 2023, and I am hoping the same, especially with him playing in a different system that has him doing things that he does well, as opposed to just hanging back 30 yards behind the line of scrimmage and making sure nobody beats the Vikings corners deep, which was pretty much what the safety's role was in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Well, that takes us to theme 3. Now, last week we did theme 3 as a podcast only. This week we're going to do it live because it's viewer questions. But we still need you to subscribe to the podcast. We need to make our beer money. As I told you last week, this is how Darren and I get our beer money. We don't make a whole lot of money off of podcasts, and we definitely haven't yet. But we need to bring up our podcast listeners. And if you miss us on Sunday live, you can't watch YouTube because you're busy, don't forget, we're on podcasts. You can find Vikings First and SKOL on any aggregator. We're out there on just about every last one of them. If you can't find us, let me know. I'll send you direct links. We are there. Thank you, Drew. we got to win sometimes, buddy, before we die. It's that simple. And we're coming up on that. So on to theme 3. You asked for it. Viewer questions.
You asked, and we try to answer as best we can. That's what we're doing this week. Yeah, we got a few. We solicited viewers' questions, a couple of yesterday, and we get a lot of good ones during when we do the live show. We also got a few yesterday, and we wanted to address them on this show. And the first one was that from our Anthony Tollinson, who has tuned in today with us and made lots of comments. Thanks for tuning in, Anthony. And his question was, of all the nose tackles in this draft, name a few you would like us to go after. And Dave, you can jump in at any time on these as well. Yes. Well, I guess my first, you love the round belly, so I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about this. But I think the first thing for me is that I think that we've already got Harrison Phillips, who can play nose, and Kyrie's Tonga, who's going to play nose. I think that with those two there, I think we're okay. We're good at nose tackle at this point. So I wouldn't actually be looking to go after a nose tackle in this draft, and certainly not early in the draft with the Vikings not having a whole lot of top 100 selections. Again, Anthony and other people on here would know better than me, but if you're looking at nose tackles, of course, you're going to bring up guys like that fellow right there, this humongous human being from like Siaka Ika from Baylor, or Maz Smith from Drew School, University of Michigan. Yeah, Mazzie Smith, the University of Michigan. So those are guys that you'd look at because they're nose tackles, they're humongous human beings, and they're also probably considered among the top 5 interior defensive linemen in this draft.
Now, with Siaka Ika, I heard reports he came in out of shape, didn't do well on his pro day, quit halfway through. We worry about, does he have the right attitude? And that's when I heard the rumor that Scene came in, not prepared. Is he not going to be prepared? Do I think he'd be great in a backup role as he learns? Absolutely. But it makes you wonder. Now, looking at the class, and we'll get to that. You want to talk about the top ones? I looked at all the defensive tackles, and I have a partial list somewhere. Here we go.
I guess one thing that I should have mentioned off the bat is, at least for me, and this is just my opinion, but I like my nose tackles like 320, 330 or more. I like pounds. Well over 300 pounds. Like in the 320, 330 range. I want guys that are going to occupy, that can't be blocked by just the center or one guy. You're going to need 2 guys to block them. I like guys that plug up holes, plug up gaps, and are impossible to move. That's that's what I think a nose tackle. That's what I like in a nose tackle. That's what I think they should be doing. I want a fire plug there. I'm expecting very little to any pass rush ability from these guys, and that's okay with me.
If you get it, that's a bonus, right?
Yes.
We got it with Fat Pat. We got it with Jerry Ball. They could push. Not only could they stop and take up blockers, 2 or 3 blockers at once, they could actually push them back, and that would be great. But you're not expecting ninja moves, and he's now back in the quarterback's lap, in other words.
I am not, no. And I also don't think that, there's some cases where you would, but particularly this year, I don't think that the Vikings should be picking a nose tackle, early in the draft. But there are guys, I think we're going to add a couple of picks in the latter part of the draft. Like we talked last week about 7 or 8, feels like about where Kwesi might be able to get us to that amount. And we're not just going to have 5, we're going to have more than that, and probably 7 or 8 picks I think would be perfect considering where we are. But so I'm thinking of, if they do pick a nose tackle, to target that there's a few guys, there's three guys I think that strike that balance of real fire plug, round bellies, and run stuffers. And the three that and that would possibly be likely will be available on day 3, when I think would be a more reasonable time for the Vikings to go after one. The three guys that kind of interest me are DeAndre Coburn from Texas, Jared Clark from Coastal Carolina, and then Broderick Martin from Western Kentucky. They're all massive human beings, depending on what, well over like in the 330 range, and I think Coburn's even 340 plus.
Big boy.
Big boy. But they aren't going to give you. They're going to give you very little in the pass rush. They're going to push the pocket. They're going to bull rush guys and move blockers into the quarterback. But they're not going to give you a lot of pass rush. But again, I'm okay with that. But what they are do is they're very stout against the run. They're impossible to move, and they're going to occupy blockers. And they're all likely to be available in the 5th round, 6th round, or 7th round, particularly Martin and Clark, who come from smaller schools and might be a little lesser known. But those are guys that I think would be interesting to target, and they're going to be guys that aren't going to. They might not even contribute a lot in their first year. Coburn probably will. He played at Texas, and he's played against a lot of big competition. But I think that these are all guys that you can develop and turn into good rotational pieces. Maybe not so much in 2023, but maybe in 2023, but certainly 2024 and 2025.
For later. Later. I looked at all the defensive tackles, and I looked at the ones that played nose tackle some point in time in their careers. And there's quite a few of them. Breesy, Cansey, just names. But they're not projected to be nose tackles.
No.
The ones that could fall into that category of who can play nose is Mozzie Smith. There's one. Drew's boy, Michigan. You get Keanu Benton.
Yes.
Wisconsin. He can play nose. He's at 309. Smith was at 323 weigh-in. Ika, obviously, we just talked about. It's the third one. He's up at 335. He meets your weight deal. We get down to Cameron Young of Mississippi State. He's just 304 pounds. He's good. Possible rotational depth there at nose. Keandre Coburn out of Texas, we talked about. Projected 5th or 6th rounder. If you get him in the 7th, it's a steal. Those are guys. You have DJ Dale out of Alabama, who's a 302-pounder. A little small. Jared Clark, when we're talking 7th rounders or beyond. Clark out of Coastal Carolina. You got Martin out of Western Kentucky. They lack in some of the stuff that you would need. Clark's a big boy. He's 334. Martin's 330. But they could be that depth, and hopefully overcome their weaknesses, because all those guys had weaknesses of some sort, whether it be slow to move, slow to react, not as strong as you'd like, great against the run, but not against, the pass. You got to develop into a more well-rounded, even though we may only play a nose tackle, pure nose tackle on 2 downs, right? And the 3rd down, bring in, our 3rd edge rusher, if we have Smith, and Hunter, and then the new guy, and then move one of the defensive tackles in. But there is someone there. Now, whether they're going to take it early, I agree with you. I strongly doubt it. Day 3, I could see us taking a pure nose tackle, but don't get your hopes up, Anthony. Don't get your hopes up.
I guess the one thing about Coburn, Clark, and Martin, I've mentioned this already on the show and other times, the facts, but the whole Senior Bowl, East-West Shrine game, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah picking 8 of his 10 draft picks last year of that. Clark played at the Reese's Senior Bowl, and then Martin and Coburn were at the East-West Shrine game. So all those guys, again, are seniors, played a lot of football, and they were at the games that the Vikings called a lot of their draft class from last year. We don't know if they're going to do that again this year, but again, just something to keep in mind from these guys, because we know Kwesi was definitely in Mobile, Alabama, for the Senior
Mm-hmm.
Bowl when it happened. He was out on the field mixing and mingling.
Now, what the graphic I put up here is from NFL Mock Draft Database, which is an interesting site. They do 1,180 different mock drafts, and they figuring out where people are trending to be taken. It is on their top defensive tackles. The three that I have starred are the only ones that come up as nose tackles, right? Nose guards, if you want to call it that. I would have to do some research on the other, but you can see where they've got them slotted picking. This is the consensus of where these guys are going to be selected. So if you drop down, Benton, if we can get it 60, we have our pick. What is it? 59, something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head where our second pick is. No, it's 87. It's in the third round, which would drop you into, if any of those guys drop, they could be, a good pickup at that. They'd be a good value, but we're going to find out. Zach Pickens, according to Anthony, is a sleeper nose tackle. Hey, I hope you're right, buddy. I don't know, and it would be interesting to see. I like I said, Anthony, as much as I'd like to have one as a backup and developing, I don't get your hopes up that they take one because of the limited amount of draft capital they have and how they work it. They may look for guys as UDFAs, to try to fill that extra hair. I want to see if we can develop one type. So, but that's it on nose tackles. That brings us to Drew's question next.
Yes, he is asking the question a lot of us are asking is, if the Vikings trade back to the end of round 1 or the beginning of round 2, what position would you be targeting? And depends on how the draft board falls is an acceptable answer. Thank you, Drew, for that.
An unacceptable answer, because that is the correct answer. He knows that. But it's for this thought exercise, and that's what it is right now, and hopefully the team is game planning this out as well. If they trade back, because like we've said, we only have 5 picks right now. Only 5. They want more. 8 would be nice, but they've also got to figure out how to get them. Trades for draft picks would be nice. If it's guys they're going to get rid of anyways, stuff like that. They've got to figure it out. But if they trade back, what position would you be targeting?
Well, I'd still be targeting corner, and corner.
I thought that'd be an easy answer for you.
Yeah, it is. It'd be for all the reasons I already mentioned. We only got 5 guys right now on the line. Of those 5, I've got questions about 2 of the 3 who are the top 3, and the other 2 are just practice squad guys. The Vikings need corners. They need them now. They need them to contribute now if this defense is going to take a step ahead in 2023. Again, Murphy is the only guy out of those 5 that I have any confidence in taking a lot of snaps in 2023. And when you consider that at this point in the offseason, that is, I think that's a scary prospect. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is going to get it figured out, but clearly the draft, whether you trade up, staying where you're at 2023, or trade down, you got to go after some corners. At least one, and 2, and probably 2. And so that's what I think they're going to do. But the thing about trading down, though, Dave, is that you do that, but you got to be sure that when you make that trade, wherever you go, that you're confident that the level of talent that you get by trading down, there's not much of a separation between what you'll get at 23 and what you might get at 29 or 31 or 35 or 36 or whatever. You still want to get a corner that's going to be able to come in 2023 and contribute and potentially be a starter for your team. If you're not confident about that, then I don't think you can trade down. And I don't think you'd want to.
That's why I posted this graphic. And sorry, that cuts
Yeah,
off the bottom of your face. But
that's
out of the
okay.
mock draft database, again, 1,180 mock drafts all mashed together to see who comes where. At pick 23, they're showing all these guys most likely available. Okay.
Yep.
On there, there's one corner, Deontay Banks. Um, but if you are targeting any of those guys and you're willing, and they're all there at 23, and you're happy with, all right, so if I trade back 10 spots, I might lose out on Deontay Banks, but I still get Zay Flowers, and I'm happy with it, or I get Brian Branch, and I'll make him a quasi nickel safety. I'm happy with that. Then you can trade back. If no corner you like is there, right, that comes into that tier of quality, and there are tiers, if that top tier or that impact tier, let's call it impact tier, is done, right?
Yeah.
They've all been selected. There is nobody. And then the next tier is down here. You can trade back and say, hey, I can just wait till I get it in the next tier, because rather than taking the next tier early, I can move down, get some value back. I'm going to pick one anyways, so I can get some value back and another pick, trade down, and then get the guy I wanted. That's the way you can do it. But it's going to be interesting to see if they do it that way.
And yeah, and that's where the decisions will get harder and more important for Kwesi. Is like you say, if a Nolan Smith or a Luca Van Ness or somebody like that is sitting there at 23, and also maybe Deontay Banks is sitting there at 23. Do you feel that Smith could be more important and make your defense better than Deontay Banks? Then that's where the whole how the draft board falls comes into play, and Kwesi's job gets, I think, a little bit harder. If a lot of those guys are gone, and there's you've got some lesser talent on edge in some of those other premium positions, and Cam Smith or Deontay Banks is still sitting there, well, I think it's an easier decision for you to maybe stay at 23, or if Emmanuel Forbes, you think he's still going to be there a little bit later, you trade, it's easier for you to trade back. But right now, yeah, if you're trading back, I'm still looking corner and looking to find the best corner I can find and draft that guy.
Yes, Merlin, I get it. You want to go out. Um, Merlin is telling me he wants to go out. So let's get to me, it depends on tiers. And if you can still get your impact guy, quote, impact definition, Kwesi, and they said there's guys all across, up and down, that they love, trade back, get more value. It's Drew. That I hope that answers your question. If we know they want to pick up picks, trading back is a good one. I wouldn't trade back too far. 10 picks, maybe. Ish. That brings you to what? The second pick in the second round as your limit, but something like that. I mean, it depends what the haul you get, but you don't want to trade back too far, or you're going to drop out of tiers that have any chance of being impactful. So, too many corners to take, Drew says, at 23, unless one of them is Gonzalez or Witherspoon. That comes back to how the board falls. If one of these guys drops, you make it happen. So, and that happens for quarterbacks too. Would I take Hendon Hooker at 23? Hell no. If I traded back a whole bunch of spots and got a whole bunch of draft picks and he's available next, where I pick, now he's falling into that range where he's a possibility. It's how they play the game. It's almost a chess match. So we shall see. But I hope I answered your question, Drew, or that we did.
Maybe not satisfactorily, but we answered it.
We need more picks. We agree with you on that. We need more picks, and the logical response is to trade down. Just don't go too far. Yes, Anthony, I agree. Hooker at 23 is sacrilegious. It's way overvaluing him from what we all know. That's why I didn't recommend it. But if we trade back and get, in middle of the second round, there's where his value starts to come into play. All right, that brings us to the third question and final question of the show. This one's from Davey, and it relates to what Drew talked about. Would you trade back in order to accumulate more picks, including a second this year, an additional third in the hopes of a premier player falls to us this year, that we use those additional picks for filling in some much needed depth, and wait till next year to utilize the first round pick? I.e., do we trade down, get a bunch of lesser picks for depth, right? Because we're expecting depth from those. We're not getting that impact, but that we save it and utilize it for next year. Say we get some picks for next year as well. I'll give you my, the trade. Somebody comes to Kwesi. All right, I'll give you my second at, the 12th pick in the second round, and I'll give you a third for next year to go along with it so I can move up. Would you take that with planning on I can use that next year to bundle up and go get my quarterback? Quarterback being, at some point, the Vikings got to get a quarterback. Kirk Cousins can't play till he's 70. As much as Rick Sosa thinks on Twitter, that's not going to happen. He got to, would delaying that and basically almost banking picks for from this year, trading down, getting some fillers, and then moving on and using some of the stuff we may get from 2023 picks to move up next year and target somebody higher. Is that worth it and the way to go?
It is for me. I've been in the trade down camp for a while, of course. Only hooker I wanted 23's Lindsay. Yeah.
Classic Drew, classic.
Yes. But yeah, I'm in the trade down camp, and particularly because of where the Vikings are right now, they don't have a lot of draft picks in 2023. I'd like them to get more. And also, I don't think there's enough depth all through the roster. And I think, more draft picks, the cheaper, younger talent could help with that. The thing with, whatever Kwesi Adofo-Mensah does, with that economics background, with that analytics background, Dave, he's going to be looking at the value of the decision that he makes. If I do this thing, is that giving me the right amount of value, where opposed to me not doing this thing? Now, all GMs are going to take that into consideration. I'm just hoping that with the economics background, with the analytics background, that he's going to be better at making those decisions than other GMs in the league, that he's going to be using different and better data than his peers in the league, and that's going to lead to better draft results for the Vikings than his peers across the NFL. But I think I like the idea of getting more picks, even if they're a little lower in the draft, and that is certainly building up that. And I'm okay with not having a first rounder this year and waiting until next year, if we can build up the draft capital and the depth. But again, I'm not in favor of trading out of the first and getting a fourth and a fifth and something else back for that. I want something in the second round in particular.
I gotcha.
And earlier in the second round too.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting how they do this, whether they go for the impact player and then, as I wrote you, a whole bunch of fluff, and then hope something out of the fluff develops. It's going to be interesting. Trade back and get additional first rounder for next year. Jason, if they could do that, that would be awesome. Don't count on it, though. First rounders are very expensive. What kind of bear is that, Dave? It is a Great Dane. He is a Blue Merle. He is a good boy most of the time, but he is a typical Dane. Actually, he's poorly bred, but he is a good Dane. Doofus. I love him. He's couch potato most of the time, but he wants to go out. He's not the only one. I got old man bladder, and we're hitting up our time limit. But it's all up to this guy, Kwesi, how he's going to do. Like I said, last year is a gimme for me. I think he was constrained by what the Wilfs wanted him to do. This year is the year. Let's start marking off that scoreboard. Hopefully he makes the right moves, and we get those impact players, and we finally start progressing to that championship level team. That brings us to the end, folks. Any last words there, Darren?
None at all, Dave. I feel I've spoken way too much as it is.
Hey, I want to thank everybody that joined us. We got a great showing today. You guys all rock. For the guys that asked us questions, thank you very much. Drew throws one last one. Will Dalvin Cook be a Viking in 2023?
Nope.
If I had to flip a coin, it'd come up, nope. I think he's going to be traded or gone. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to use that as money space, even if they have to cut him. And then somebody's going to get a steal. The question is, are they willing to pay for that? If they trade for him, they're willing to pay for it. Put it that way. It's a deal. Everybody knows that if the Vikings most likely will cut him, well, then do you want to compete with everybody to try to get him in free agency? Or do you want to claim him in a trade and know you have him? That's the way that works. With that, what do we say, buddy?
We say SKOL Vikings, baby.
SKOL Vikings! Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and rate us on your favorite podcast aggregator. Darren and Dave, thank you for watching this episode of Two Old Bloggers. We look forward to seeing you on every show on the new Vikings First and SKOL. You can find our podcast as part of the Fans First Sports Network. Sports takes for the fan, from the fan. SKOL, everybody!